Behind the golden gates of Windsor Castle, where centuries of royal secrets whisper through ancient stone corridors, something extraordinary was about to unfold. On a seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning in October, when the autumn mist clung to the castle grounds like a protective veil, Queen Elizabeth would experience a moment so profound, so deeply human, that even her most trusted advisors would struggle to comprehend its significance. What happened in the private drawing room that morning would shake the very foundations of royal protocol. A single letter, delivered by trembling hands, contained words that would strip away decades of carefully constructed composure and reveal the beating heart beneath the crown. This is not a story about duty, tradition, or the weight of the monarchy. This is a story about a grandmother, a mother, and a woman who for one unguarded moment allowed the world to see her soul. The truth of what transpired that day remained buried in palace walls for months, known only to a select few who swore an oath of silence. But secrets, like autumn leaves, eventually find their way to the ground, where they can be discovered by those brave enough to look. What you're about to read will change everything you thought you knew about the woman behind the crown. Lady Margaret Thornbury had served the royal household for 37 years, and in all that time, she had never seen her hand shake while carrying the morning correspondence. But on this particular Tuesday morning, as she walked the crimson-carpeted corridor toward the Queen's private study, the cream-coloured envelope in her possession felt heavier than the crown jewels themselves. The envelope bore no royal seal, no official markings that would typically identify correspondence worthy of the monarch's immediate attention. Instead, it carried only a simple address written in childish handwriting to Granny Lilibet, Windsor Castle, England. The return address read, Emma Patterson, age 7, Manchester Children's Hospital. Margaret paused outside the mahogany doors of the Queen's study, listening to the familiar sound of her sovereign's morning routine. The gentle clink of bone china, the rustle of newspaper pages, the soft scratch of pen on paper as she reviewed the day's schedule. These were the sounds of a monarchy in motion, the quiet symphony of duty that had played every morning for over 7 decades. The Queen looked up as Margaret entered, her eyes immediately noticing the unusual hesitation in her lady-in-waiting's demeanour. Elizabeth had always possessed an uncanny ability to read the emotions of those around her, a skill honed by decades of navigating complex political waters and family dynamics. "What is it, Margaret?" the Queen asked, setting down her fountain pen with the precision that marked all her movements. Margaret approached the polished desk, her footsteps muffled by the Persian rug that had witnessed countless moments of royal decision-making. She placed the envelope before the Queen with the same reverence she might show when presenting state documents. "Your Majesty." This arrived with the Morning Post. It's marked as personal correspondence. The Queen's eyes fell upon the envelope, and for just a moment, something shifted in her expression. The formal mask that she wore like armor seemed to soften as she recognized the innocent handwriting. Her fingers, aged but steady, traced the words, Granny Lilibet, with a tenderness that Margaret had rarely witnessed. "From Manchester, you say?" the Queen murmured, though she was already reading the return address herself. "Yes, Your Majesty." From the Children's Hospital, Elizabeth had received thousands of letters from children over the years. They came from schools, youth organizations, and sometimes from young patients in hospitals across the Commonwealth. Each letter was precious to her, though royal protocol typically dictated that responses be handled by her correspondence secretary. But something about this particular envelope made her reach for her letter opener personally. The Queen carefully slit open the envelope, mindful not to tear any part of what lay inside. As she unfolded the letter, a small drawing fluttered to the desk, a child's attempt at drawing a crown, coloured in bright yellow crayon with purple jewels dotting its peaks. The letter itself was written on lined paper, the kind used in primary schools across Britain. Some words were misspelled, others were crossed out and rewritten, but the message was clear in its simplicity and devastating in its sincerity. "Dear Granny Lilibet," the letter began, and already the Queen could feel an unusual tightness in her chest. "My name is Emma, and I am 7 years old. I am in the hospital because I am very sick. The doctors say I might not get better, but I wanted to write to you before I go to heaven, to be with Jesus and my mummy who died last year." The Queen's breathing grew shallow as she continued reading, each word striking her heart with unexpected force. "I saw you on the telly when my daddy brought his little television to my hospital room. You looked very sad at the big funeral with all the flowers. I wanted you to know that my mummy told me you were like a grandmother to everyone in England, even people you never meet. She said you care about all of us. Elizabeth's hand moved to her chest, pressing against the familiar weight of the brooch she wore, a piece that had belonged to her own mother. The child's words seemed to echo through the years, carrying with them the voices of all the children she had met, all the families who had looked to her for comfort during times of loss and uncertainty. I drew you a crown because Mummy said you are the most important lady in the world. But I think you might be sad sometimes, because being important must be very hard. I want you to know that when I go to heaven, I will ask God to help you not be so sad. The Queen's vision blurred slightly, and she blinked rapidly, trying to maintain the composure that had carried her through state funerals, constitutional crises, and personal tragedies. But Emma's letter continued, each sentence a gentle assault on the walls she had built around her heart. Daddy says you have been the Queen for so long that you must know everything about being brave. I am trying to be brave like you, but sometimes I cry when the nurses come with the medicine that makes me feel sick. Do you ever cry, Granny Lilibet? Mummy said it's okay to cry sometimes. The Queen set the letter down for a moment, removing her reading glasses and pinching the bridge of her nose. Margaret, who had remained standing at a respectful distance, noticed the unusual pause and took a small step forward. Your Majesty, shall I? Please, the Queen whispered, her voice barely audible. Give me a moment. Margaret had served the royal family long enough to recognize when privacy was needed. She retreated quietly, closing the study door behind her with the softest of clicks. Alone now, Elizabeth allowed herself to truly absorb the weight of Emma's words. The child's innocent questions pierced through decades of royal training, reaching the part of her that remained simply a woman who had indeed known sadness, who had indeed cried when no one was watching. She picked up the letter again, her hands less steady now. I wanted to tell you that even though we never met, I love you because Mummy said you love all of us. I hope when you wear your real crown, you remember that a little girl in Manchester thinks you are the kindest queen in all the fairy tales. The letter concluded with a simple closing. Love and hugs, Emma. P.S. I hope you like my crown drawing. Daddy helped me spell jewels right. Elizabeth set the letter down and looked at the crayon drawing once more. The crown was lopsided, the jewels were scattered randomly across its surface, and one of the points was notably taller than the others. It was imperfect, childish, and absolutely beautiful in its sincerity. For several long minutes, the Queen sat in complete silence, staring out the tall windows that offered a view of the castle grounds. The autumn morning was crisp and clear, and she could see the gardeners going about their daily tasks, maintaining the beauty of Windsor with the same dedication that she had maintained the monarchy. But in this moment, surrounded by the trappings of royal power and constitutional duty, Elizabeth felt more vulnerable than she had in years. Emma's letter had accomplished something that state papers and official dispatches never could. It had reminded her of the human cost of service, of the people whose lives she touched without ever knowing their names or their struggles. The Queen reached for her personal telephone, a secure line that connected directly to her private secretary's office. When the familiar voice answered, she spoke with quiet determination. I need you to arrange something for me, she said, her voice carrying a new quality that her staff had rarely heard. There's a young patient at Manchester Children's Hospital. Her name is Emma Patterson. I want to know everything about her condition, her family, and how we might be able to help. Of course, Your Majesty. Shall I route this through the usual charitable channels? No, the Queen replied firmly. This is personal. Handle it discreetly, but handle it immediately. As she hung up the phone, Elizabeth picked up Emma's drawing once more. The child's innocent artistry seemed to glow in the morning light streaming through the study windows. For the first time in months, tears gathered in her eyes. Not tears of sadness, but tears of recognition. In Emma's simple words and crooked crown, she had seen herself reflected not as a monarch, but as a woman capable of being loved by a stranger for no reason other than the kindness she tried to show to her people. The Queen carefully placed the letter, and drawing in her personal file, the one reserved for correspondence that touched her heart in ways that state business never could, she would carry Emma's words with her throughout the day, and they would change something fundamental about how she saw her role, her purpose, and the profound connection between a crown and the hearts it was meant to serve. Outside her study door, the palace continued its ancient rhythm of service and ceremony. But inside, a transformation had begun that would ripple outward in ways that no one could have anticipated. 3 hours after reading Emma's letter, the Queen made a decision that would send shockwaves through the carefully orchestrated world of royal protocol. She summoned her private secretary, Sir James Whitmore, to her study with an urgency that immediately caught his attention. Sir James had served the crown for over 2 decades, and he prided himself on being able to anticipate the Queen's needs before she voiced them. But when he entered her study that morning, he found her standing by the window with an expression he had never seen before. One of absolute determination, mixed with something that looked remarkably like maternal concern.
"James," she began without preamble, "I need to go to Manchester. Today." The private secretary's carefully maintained composure faltered for just a moment.
"Your Majesty, you have the Privy Council meeting this afternoon, and tomorrow's schedule includes—" "Cancel them," the Queen said quietly, turning from the window to face him directly. "All of them. Ma'am, with respect, cancelling these engagements on such short notice would require explanations to the Prime Minister's office, the Archbishop, and several Commonwealth representatives who—" "Then tell them the truth," Elizabeth interrupted, her voice carrying a steel that Sir James recognized from moments of absolute royal resolve. "Tell them that their Queen has remembered something important about why she wears the crown." Sir James had witnessed the Queen navigate constitutional crises, family scandals, and matters of international diplomacy with unshakable composure. But he had never seen her display the kind of emotional intensity that now filled the room like a living presence. "Ma'am, might I ask what has prompted this urgent need to visit Manchester?" Rather than answer with words, the Queen handed him Emma's letter. Sir James read it carefully, his decades of training in diplomatic language making him particularly sensitive to the raw honesty in the child's words. When he finished, he looked up to find the Queen watching him with eyes that seemed to hold both tears and fire. "How old is she, do we know?" he asked softly. 7. And according to the information I've already requested, she has been battling leukemia for 8 months. Her father works night shifts at a factory so he can be with her during the day. Her mother died in a car accident last winter. The Queen's voice carried each fact like a prayer. She has no grandparents living, no extended family. It's just Emma and her father, facing this alone. Sir James understood then why his sovereign's usual adherence to protocol had suddenly become secondary to something far more fundamental. In his years of service, he had seen the Queen moved by many causes, touched by many stories of hardship and courage. But something about this particular child had reached past the crown and touched the grandmother's heart that beat beneath it. "What are you thinking, ma'am?" he asked, though he suspected he already knew. "I'm thinking that in 70 years of being Queen, I have visited hospitals, opened wings, cut ribbons, and shaken countless hands, but I have never simply sat beside a dying child and listened to what she wanted to tell me." The Queen moved to her desk and picked up Emma's drawing, studying it as if it contained secrets of state. "This little girl drew me a crown, James. She used her precious energy while fighting for her life to create something beautiful for me, and she did it because she wanted me to know I wasn't alone." The weight of those words settled in the room like dust motes in afternoon sunlight. Sir James had spent his career managing the delicate balance between the Queen's personal desires and her constitutional obligations, but he had never faced a moment when those two things aligned so perfectly, so urgently. "What do you need from me, Your Majesty?"
"I need a car, not the state limousine."
"I need minimal security, just enough to satisfy the protection officers. And I need you to contact Manchester Children's Hospital and tell them that Elizabeth Windsor would like to visit a young patient named Emma Patterson." Not the Queen making a royal visit, just a grandmother who received a letter that touched her heart. Sir James nodded, already mentally rearranging the impossible logistics that such a request would require. "And if the media discovers, let them," the Queen said with surprising firmness. "Perhaps it's time for people to see that being Queen doesn't mean being immune to the simple human need to comfort a frightened child." Within 2 hours, the unthinkable had become reality. The Queen's convoy, smaller and less ostentatious than usual, was travelling north toward Manchester. Elizabeth sat in the back seat, still holding Emma's letter, reading it over and over as the English countryside rolled past her window. Her protection officer, Detective Chief Inspector Sarah Morrison, sat in the front passenger seat, occasionally glancing back with barely concealed amazement at this unprecedented departure from protocol. In her 15 years of protecting the royal family, DCI Morrison had never seen the Queen display such personal urgency about a non-state matter. "Ma'am," Morrison said carefully, "the hospital has been notified of your arrival, but they've been asked to keep it absolutely confidential until you've had your visit. The ward has been quietly cleared of media and non-essential personnel." "Good," the Queen replied, though her attention remained focused on the letter in her hands. "And Emma's father?" "He's been told that there's a special visitor coming to see Emma, but not who. The hospital thought it best not to overwhelm him or the child with advance notice." The Queen nodded approvingly. She had learned over the decades that sometimes the most meaningful encounters happened when protocol took a back seat to genuine human connection. As they approached Manchester, Elizabeth found herself thinking about all the children she had met over the years. Thousands of young faces had smiled at her, curtsied to her, shaken her hand during formal visits. But how many of those children had she really seen? How many had she truly heard? Emma's letter had awakened something in her that felt both foreign and familiar. A desire to step outside the carefully choreographed world of royal duty and simply be present with someone who needed compassion more than ceremony. Manchester Children's Hospital came into view just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a modern building, all glass and steel and hope, designed to look more like a place of healing than the medical fortress that older hospitals often resembled. The Queen could see colourful murals painted on the walls, cheerful decorations in the windows, all the efforts made to bring light into a place where families faced their darkest hours. Dr. Catherine Hughes, the hospital's chief administrator, met them at a side entrance that had been discreetly secured for their arrival. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and steady hands, someone who had clearly spent years learning how to balance hope and honesty in equal measure.
Your Majesty, Dr. Pardon.
Hughes said with a brief curtsy that somehow managed to be both respectful and efficient. We are deeply honoured by your visit. Emma and her father are in room 312. I should tell you that Emma had a difficult night, but she's been alert and comfortable this morning. How is her prognosis? The Queen asked directly, her years of receiving briefings on sensitive matters making her comfortable with difficult truths. Doctor, Hughes paused, choosing her words carefully. Emma is a remarkable little girl who has shown extraordinary courage throughout her treatment. Her father, David, has been told that we're focusing on keeping her comfortable and surrounded by love. The Queen understood the delicate language of medical professionals. Emma was dying, and everyone knew it, except perhaps Emma herself. The thought should have felt overwhelming, but instead, it crystallized her sense of purpose. She was here not to solve anything or fix anything, but simply to honor the connection that a brave little girl had reached out to make. They walked through corridors that hummed with the quiet activity of healing. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency, their colorful scrubs bringing warmth to the clinical environment. Children's artwork lined the walls. Drawings of rainbows and families and pets, small declarations of hope made by young hands that had known too much about suffering. Room 312 was at the end of a long hallway. Through the partially open door, the Queen could hear the soft murmur of voices and the gentle beeping of medical equipment. She paused outside, suddenly aware of the magnitude of the moment she was about to enter. Ma'am, DCI Morrison said quietly, shall I announce you? No, the Queen replied, straightening her shoulders with the same resolve she had shown at coronations and state funerals. Let me do this. She knocked gently on the doorframe, and a man's voice called out, Come in. David Patterson looked up from where he sat beside his daughter's hospital bed, expecting to see another doctor or nurse. Instead, he found himself looking into the unmistakable face of the woman whose image had graced stamps and currency his entire life. For a moment, he seemed frozen, unsure whether to stand, bow, or simply stare in disbelief. Mr. Patterson, the Queen said gently, I'm Elizabeth. I received a beautiful letter from your daughter, and I hoped I might have the chance to thank her in person. Emma, who had been dozing against her pillows, opened her eyes at the sound of an unfamiliar voice. When she saw the Queen standing in her doorway, her face lit up with the pure, unfiltered joy that only children can display. Granny Lilibet, Emma exclaimed, struggling to sit up straighter in her bed. You got my letter! Did you like my crown? The Queen moved to Emma's bedside with a grace that spoke of decades of practice at putting people at ease in extraordinary circumstances. But there was something different about her manner now. Less formal, more genuinely warm than her usual public demeanor. I loved your crown, the Queen said, settling into the chair beside Emma's bed with an ease that surprised everyone in the room. In fact, I liked it so much that I brought it with me. Would you like to see it? Emma's eyes widened as the Queen carefully withdrew the crayon drawing from her handbag. The child's artwork looked somehow more precious now, handled with the same care the Queen might show to a piece of the crown jewels. You kept it, Emma said, reaching out to touch the paper with trembling fingers. Daddy, she kept my drawing. David Patterson, who had been struggling to process the surreal nature of the situation, finally found his voice. Your Majesty, we never expected. Emma just wanted to write to you because because she has a kind heart and wanted to share it with someone she thought might need kindness, the Queen finished gently, just as her mother taught her to do. At the mention of her mother, Emma's expression grew serious, and she studied the Queen's face with the directness that only children possess. "Are you sad today, Granny Lilibet? You look a little sad around your eyes." The question hung in the air like a bridge between two souls, one wearing a crown and the other wearing a hospital gown, but both carrying the weight of loss and the hope of connection. The Queen felt something crack open in her chest, a wall she hadn't even realized she'd built around her heart. The Queen looked into Emma's eyes and saw something she had rarely encountered in 7 decades of public life. Complete honesty without agenda, compassion without expectation, love without condition. The child's question about sadness hung between them like a sacred trust, demanding nothing less than absolute truth in return. "Yes, Emma," the Queen said softly, her voice carrying a vulnerability that would have shocked the nation had they heard it. "I am sad sometimes." Being a grandmother from far away can be lonely, especially when you meet someone as special as you and realize how much you wish you could have known them sooner.
Emma reached out with surprising strength and placed her small hand over the Queen's gloved one.
"Mummy said that sad comes with love. She said the bigger your love gets, the bigger your sad can get too. But she said that's what makes us human instead of just things walking around." David Patterson watched this exchange with tears streaming down his face, witnessing his dying daughter offer comfort to the most powerful woman in the Commonwealth with the same natural grace she had shown throughout her illness. He had spent months watching Emma face needles and chemotherapy and sleepless nights with courage that humbled him daily. But this moment, seeing her reach across the vast divide of circumstance to touch another person's pain, this was when he truly understood the depth of his daughter's spirit. The Queen gently turned her hand palm up so she could properly hold Emma's fingers. "Your mummy sounds like she was very wise. I bet she taught you lots of important things. She taught me that everyone needs someone to love them, even if they're famous or important or scary looking. She said that's why God made grandmothers, so there would always be someone whose job it was to love people just because they existed." Emma paused, studying the Queen's face with the intensity of someone trying to memorize every detail. "Do you have someone whose job it is to love you, Granny Lilibet?" The question struck the Queen like lightning, illuminating corners of her heart that had been dark for so long she had forgotten they existed. She thought of her late husband Philip, who had indeed made loving her his job for over 7 decades. She thought of her children and grandchildren, scattered across their own duties and lives. She thought of the millions of people who looked to her for stability and comfort, but from whom protocol kept her at an inevitable distance. "I did," the Queen said carefully. "My husband Philip was very good at that job. But he went to heaven last year, and sometimes the palace can feel very big and quiet without him." Emma's face brightened with sudden understanding. "That's why you looked so sad at the big funeral. I saw it on Daddy's television. You were missing your person who loved you just for being you." The accuracy of Emma's observation took the Queen's breath away. In all the formal condolences, all the state sympathy, all the careful words spoken by world leaders and dignitaries, no one had captured the essence of her loss as simply and completely as this 7-year-old girl with crayon under her fingernails and hope in her eyes. "Yes," the Queen whispered, feeling tears that she had held back for months finally beginning to surface. "I was missing my person."
Emma struggled to sit up straighter, her face animated with the excitement of someone who had just discovered the solution to a complex problem.
"Well, you don't have to be sad about that anymore. I can be your person who loves you just for being you. I'm really good at that job because Mummy taught me how." The words hit the Queen like a physical force, and for the first time in anyone's memory, Elizabeth Windsor, monarch, grandmother, woman, began to cry openly. Not the careful, controlled tears that she might allow during state occasions, but the deep, releasing sobs of someone whose heart had been touched by grace. David Patterson started to move forward, perhaps to offer some kind of assistance or apology for his daughter's boldness. But Dr. Hughes gently placed a hand on his arm. She had worked with dying children for 15 years, and she recognized the sacred nature of what was happening in room 312. Emma, rather than being frightened by the Queen's tears, reached out with both arms in the universal gesture of comfort that children offer instinctively. The Queen leaned forward, careful not to disturb any of the medical equipment, and allowed herself to be held by a dying child who had somehow become her salvation. "It's okay, Granny Lilibet," Emma whispered, patting the Queen's shoulder with gentle efficiency. "Crying is just love with nowhere else to go. Mummy told me that too. They stayed like that for several long minutes, the Queen and the little girl, while the sound of Emma's heart monitor provided a steady rhythm that seemed to synchronize their breathing. When Elizabeth finally pulled back, her face was streaked with tears, but transformed by something that looked remarkably like peace. "Emma," she said, her voice steady again but somehow softer than before, "would you like to see something special?" The child nodded eagerly, and the Queen reached into her handbag once more. This time, she withdrew something that made everyone in the room gasp audibly, her personal coronet, a smaller crown that she wore for certain state functions, made of diamonds and sapphires that caught the hospital room's fluorescent light and threw rainbows across the walls. "This is one of my real crowns," the Queen explained, holding it so Emma could see every detail. "But do you know what I realized when I read your letter? This crown is very beautiful and it's very expensive, but it's not the most important crown I own." Emma's eyes were wide with wonder as she studied the precious stones and intricate metalwork. "What's the most important crown you own?" The Queen smiled, and for the first time in months, it was a smile that reached all the way to her eyes. She carefully placed Emma's crayon drawing on the hospital bed between them. "This one. Because this crown was made with love by someone who wanted me to know I wasn't alone. This crown reminds me that being a queen isn't about wearing fancy jewels or living in a palace. It's about loving people and letting them love you back." Emma picked up her drawing and studied it seriously, as if seeing it for the first time. "It's not very straight, is it? And some of the jewels fell off." "That's what makes it perfect," the Queen said firmly. "The best things in life are a little crooked and have pieces that fall off sometimes. That's how you know they're real." The afternoon stretched on in a way that felt both eternal and far too brief. The Queen sat beside Emma's bed, talking about everything and nothing, about corgis and castles, about favorite colors and favorite foods, about what it felt like to wave from a balcony and what it felt like to be 7 years old and brave. Emma told the Queen about her favorite nurse, about the therapy dog that visited on Thursdays, about how she was teaching her daddy to braid hair even though he wasn't very good at it yet. She spoke about her mother with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who had learned that love doesn't end just because life does. The Queen found herself sharing stories she hadn't told in years, about learning to drive during the war, about the time she hid in a dumbwaiter to avoid a particularly tedious state dinner, about how her corgis had once stolen an entire Christmas ham and buried it in the palace gardens. As the sun began to set outside Emma's window, painting the hospital room in shades of gold and amber, the Queen realized that something fundamental had shifted inside her. The weight of the crown, both literal and metaphorical, felt different now. Lighter in some ways, but also more meaningful. Emma had begun to tire, her small reserves of energy depleted by the excitement and emotion of the afternoon. But even as she grew sleepy, she continued to hold the Queen's hand, as if afraid that letting go might make this magical afternoon disappear like a dream. "Granny Lilibet," Emma said softly, her eyes beginning to flutter closed. "When I go to heaven to be with Mummy, I'm going to tell her that I found someone who needed a person to love them. And I'm going to ask God to make sure you don't get too lonely in your big palace." The Queen squeezed Emma's hand gently. "And I'm going to make sure that everyone knows about a little girl named Emma who taught a queen how to wear her crown with her heart instead of just her head." Emma smiled sleepily. "Will you keep my drawing forever?" "Forever and always," the Queen promised. "And every time I look at it, I'll remember that the most important crown I ever received was drawn in crayon by the bravest person I've ever met." As Emma drifted off to sleep, the Queen sat quietly beside her bed, watching the rise and fall of the child's chest, listening to the steady beep of monitors that marked each precious heartbeat. David Patterson sat on the other side of the bed, holding his daughter's other hand, and for a long time no one spoke. Finally, the Queen rose carefully, making sure not to wake Emma. She looked down at the sleeping child, memorizing every detail of her peaceful face, knowing that this might be the last time she would see her young friend awake. Before leaving, the Queen did something unprecedented. She removed her personal brooch, a piece that had belonged to Queen Victoria, and pinned it to Emma's hospital gown, right over her heart. "So she knows she's loved," the Queen whispered to David, who was crying too hard to speak. The journey back to Windsor passed in contemplative silence. The Queen sat with Emma's drawing in her lap, occasionally touching the paper, as if to reassure herself that the afternoon had been real. As the castle came into view, she realized that she was returning as a different woman than the one who had left that morning. That night, for the first time since Philip's death, The Queen sat down and wrote a personal letter, not a state document or official correspondence, but a message from one human being to another. She wrote to David Patterson, thanking him for sharing his daughter's extraordinary spirit with her, and promising that Emma's memory would live on in ways that mattered. She also gave instructions for Emma's drawing to be professionally framed and hung in her private study, where she would see it every morning as she began her royal duties. Let the world see that their queen had learned something valuable about the weight of love and the lightness of joy. 3 weeks later, Emma Patterson passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by the love that had defined her short life. The Queen attended her funeral in a small Manchester church, sitting quietly in the back pew with tears streaming down her face as a 7-year-old's courage was celebrated by everyone whose life she had touched. At the service, the vicar read from a letter that Emma had dictated to her father just days before she died, a letter addressed to all the people who had shown her kindness during her illness. The final paragraph was addressed specifically to Granny Lilibet. "Thank you for visiting me and for crying with me, and for letting me teach you about being loved. I hope you remember that being a queen means taking care of people's hearts, not just their country. Wear your crown proud, but remember that the best crown is the one that nobody can see, the one made out of all the people who love you just because you're you." As the Queen listened to those words, she touched the space where Emma's brooch still rested over her heart, and she smiled through her tears. She had received many honors in her lifetime, but none had meant more than being chosen as the person worthy of a dying child's love. From that day forward, the Queen carried herself differently. She still performed her royal duties with the same dedication and grace, but there was something new in her bearing, a warmth that hadn't been there before, a recognition that the crown's greatest power lay not in its authority, but in its capacity to connect one heart to another. Emma's crown remained on the Queen's desk for the rest of her reign, a daily reminder that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the smallest teachers, and that love, offered freely and received gratefully, can transform even the most ancient institutions. The little girl from Manchester had taught a queen that the most important job in the world wasn't ruling a nation, it was simply being someone worth loving and brave enough to love in return.